Hi, my name's Antonio Duke. I'm an actor and playwright who does solo performance these days. So I write my own work. I am a hip hop dancer. I've been hip hop dancing for 13 years. I am a sleight of hand magician sometimes. That was my first kind of introduction to the arts of sleight of hand magic. Um, and yeah, that's a bit about me.
Welcome to Scratch Claw Push, a podcast about artists clawing out a place for themselves in the world. I'm Billy Joe Cones.
And I'm Brendan Duke. Let's go.
Awesome.
Actually, the second magician we've had on the show.
Oh wow, so good to know.
Yeah.
We had one of our guests, a guy named Brian Stoops, apparently got into it from a very young age and did it at one point professionally for quite a while.
Oh wow.
Like, I think he started when he was 7 and did it for like 20 years.
Yes.
Yeah.
Magic bug, it gets you at a young age.
That's something I didn't know about you. So how did you get into the magic thing? You said that was your first performance.
Yeah. My parents, when I was like 6 years old, they just had, a house party once and they invited some friends over. And my dad is from Scotland and he had some friends come over from Scotland. And one of his friends just did a simple sleight of hand trick where he threw a card in the air and it disappeared. And I was just like completely amazed by it. And I was bugging him to tell me how he did it, but he wouldn't tell me how he did the trick. So I nerded out and I just went to the nearest library or bookstore and I bought a simple, I think the book was called Now You See It, Now You Don't. And it was just a simple book on card tricks about sleight of hand magic. And in that book was the trick he did. So I cracked the code and I just practiced and practiced and practiced. And that was kind of the rabbit hole from then on. So yeah, that was my first kind of introduction.
Did you perfect that trick then?
I did. I still do it to this day, actually. I try to, amaze my friends when I can. But yeah, then I got into coin tricks and, the cups and balls routine and all that good stuff.
That's amazing. I'm with you. I love magic, like ever since I was a kid. Like sometimes you see those tabletop shows where it's like the camera's right there and you're like, how are they doing these things? It takes a lot of work.
It does. It does. It's quite an obsession. Yeah, and I like nerd out on those, sleight of hand YouTube videos with the tabletops. It's quite a fun time.
So was that like the gateway into acting? Was the magic?
It was actually magic, especially sleight of hand magic and acting, kind of go hand in hand. In the sense that acting is living truthfully under imaginary circumstances, and you have the illusion of the trick. So you're really kind of studying behavior of people and how to kind of uh, fool them, really. So yeah, that's kind of once I discovered theater in high school, I kind of combined the kind of two and started my own kind of solo work, really from there.
So I'm curious, like, so what was your best trick, or what would you say was your best trick?
I'm pretty good with the cards, but coin magic is kind of what I've been working on lately. I think my best trick is there's this trick that I think I saw on TV, maybe by David Blaine, where he just takes a coin and he just makes it disappear. And I remember doing that for the first time to my family and friends, and them, being taken aback by it. So that was always a good feeling to know that you fooled the folks. Yeah, so coin magic, I think, is the one.
So you said you transitioned into theater like during school, high school, or earlier?
High school, yeah. Um, I went to Washburn High School in South Minneapolis, and uh, I lived in Florida prior to moving back to Minnesota. And once we moved back, my family, the next day, we kind of had to jump into high school. And the first classroom I was shown by the principal was the Black Box Theater. And I, up until that point, thought theater was for complete nerds. I'm going to do this thing. What is this? I want to be one of the popular kids. And then, of course, I just like fell in love with it as soon as I saw the kind of social justice work that the theater teacher there, Crystal Spring, was doing. Um, I'm like a horribly shy person. So theater kind of allowed me to like write my own monologues and like be social. And it had that kind of magic to it where you can like kind of step into a different character. So which kind of helped a lot, and allowed me to like network, Um,
So
and
wait, so you said you came into the school and you're like, I want to be popular, but you're also really shy. How does
yeah,
that work?
that's a good question. I think every kid wants to be, popular in high school. But the dilemma is like, I have an identical twin brother, um, and he's also a performer and poet. And he was the very extroverted one, and I think all the introvertedness fell to me. And yeah, it's you want to be, kind of the guy who takes up space in the room, but I wasn't until I got on stage, and then I was like, oh, this is an interesting part of the self. So that kind of like allowed me to navigate the hurricane of high school.
So you said you were writing your own monologues. Did that start kind of right away, or did that come much later after you'd done some acting for a minute?
That came right away. So the first assignment in our theater class was to go home and pretty much write whatever you want and just share it with the class. And I wrote this dream I had about a guy in the South sitting in a rocking chair who I kind of like um, thought was just like an old man. And I just wrote that what happened in my dream down and I said it to the class, and people seemed to like it. And we kind of used that monologue as the introduction to the plays we would tour. We would tour to different high schools and different organizations and perform these kind of social justice theater pieces. So that was kind of my start to creating my own work. It's just my high school theater teacher saying, you know, write something and share.
So is that something that like it's good that you had that influence right away, I think, because um I didn't come to the whole like I created things, but I never finished them and I didn't really put them out there. It was kind of, too scary. And so I did a lot of like waiting around and auditioning and hoping people would pick me.
Mm,
Do you find that having been pushed into creation earlier, um, did that help you in any way then when you got into the real world, like avoid that trap of just waiting to be chosen?
for sure. Yeah. Performing still, contrary to my profession, is absolutely terrifying. Like it is truly terrifying. I just got back from a rehearsal for a play that's going to happen at the Southern Theater in June, and it was the first day of rehearsal, and it's still terrifying. It's still like uh, every time you start a play, you kind of have no idea what you're doing. But that kind of introduction of you can make your own work was so embedded in me that it just created this kind of like artistic engine of self drive where you don't have to ask permission. Um, in auditioning for me, I'm a horrible auditioner. it's the most artificial thing for me. It's like it's the most unnatural thing to do
Mm-hmm.
still. So creating my own work, I can cast myself, which is helpful. Um, and it kind of allows you to tell the narrative that you want to tell. And there's a lot of social justice issues that I'm passionate about that it's like, uh, you know, just screaming out. So I try to write it down and share it with folks and have a communal discussion about it.
Were there certain plays or playwrights that kind of like influenced you right away, or that you were drawn to?
Yes, there was. The first monologue that I saw in theater class was by a playwright named August Wilson, and it was from a play called Fences. In one of there's a theater here called Penumbra Theater, and one of their teaching artists came into Washburn and did a monologue from this play, and I was just like taken aback. I was so curious about the circumstances and the language that was used. So August Wilson still has a profound effect. Um, Folks like Terrell Abbott McCraney, who wrote Moonlight, the film, um, and The Brother Size. I saw that also in high school, his original play, The Brother Size, and that had a profound effect as well.
Yeah, Moonlight's a beautiful film. And August Wilson, yeah, very well known in the Twin Cities because of Penumbra and his connection there. Um, I'm curious, so you kind of do it all. Yeah, you run the Ife project, you are an actor, you write, you direct as well, if I'm not
Mm-hmm.
mistaken. Do you find that, because you talked about this anxiety that you have about auditioning or just even being in the shows, do you find that that helps you or hinders you from connecting with other people? Because I know, like, yeah, auditioning can be a scary thing, especially when there's this power dynamic or perceived power dynamic of, I'm trying to be chosen, please choose me. They have all the power, I have none. I think that is so damaging to actors in some way to have that feeling and to not feel empowered. So I'm curious how that plays out in what you do
For
or
sure,
on both sides of the table.
totally. Yeah, anxiety and theater making. What I'm continuing to discover is like there's such an antithesis to like performance. It's like you can go from like so much enthusiasm about a particular moment or during a show to like utter just like why did I even choose to do this? And I think that kind of antithesis is like the blessing and the curse. You know, yeah, I think it. I think the anxiety or the anxiousness or the awkwardness is kind of. I think it does help at ways because I observe so much. So much of my artistic process is just observing life and watching and not speaking. And I think that kind of helps. Um, I was told once that there are like two kinds of actors. There's the actors who are kind of like observing, the insects on the ground, and then there's the actors who are like so excited to be on stage and in the spotlight. And I'm definitely the one who observes all the little creatures and tries to, write plays about it. So yeah, it's it's both a hindrance, and fuel.
Do you find when you're directing or when you're on the other side of the table, though, that that gives you empathy for the people you're working with?
Totally, because I think we're all kind of walking in the dark. You know what I mean? I think we're all kind of like a bit unsure. Um, the creative process is so mythical and mystical. Sure, there's like technique and there's a craft and there's like practicality to storytelling, but at the end of the day, uh, why something works is kind of a lightning bolt. It's kind of like a mysterious kind of thing. Yeah, why something has that kind of spark to it is kind of like a improv. It's I don't have a formula for it. I have certain technique that can create the right parameters to help, but why something works is still very mysterious, I think, as it should be.
So this is a little off the path, but I'm curious, like when you're talking about things that work and the lightning bolt, I've had those moments of watching something where it just strikes me, it hits you at the right time when you're in the right place for it. And those things that are just profound. What is your earliest memory of a performance that you saw that hit you like that?
Mm. Wow, that is a good question. Well, performance specific. I I mentioned this play before, The Brother Size, at the Guthrie Theater in the Dowling Studio, by Terrell Evan McCraney. And the same mentor who did that August Wilson monologue in the Black Box was cast in that play. And he played a character named Ogun. And he had this monologue where he just is angry at his little brother and he just like rips him to shreds in this beautiful soliloquy. And I remember sitting in the theater and hearing the walls shake because of this vocal performance. And I was like, you can be that big on stage, like you can, you could hear a pin drop. Yeah, that was definitely the moment where I was like, goals, I want to do that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So one thing that fascinated me when I was looking on your website, you were talking about the kind of the griot tradition
Mm-hmm.
that from like kind of the West African storytellers thing that I think like nowadays I think recently people are becoming more kind of aware of it because they use the name in the Black Panther movies, for series for series AI, and then there's the website actually the griot. If I'm pronouncing that right, I apologize if I'm not, because I've heard it pronounced griot and then like just griot, like where they just drop the T altogether. So so like tell us about like how did that come into the picture?
Yeah, for sure. So there was well, I've heard the word griot kind of growing up, but I never kind of knew what it meant. And then there was this festival at Mixed Blood Theater first, and then at the Guthrie Theater, called the New Griots Festival. And it was curated by Jamil Jude, who's now the artistic director of True Colors Theater Company. And he had this application pool, and I applied and got in, and kind of found out more about the griot being part of that festival. And just being a Black solo performer, it kind of went hand in hand once you know that griots were traveling poets who sometimes performed in the community. So that kind of just like was like no brainer. And being part of that festival kind of some imposter syndrome is real. And even though I've written solo performance pieces prior to being part of that festival, it helped kind of Jamil saying you're on the right track and you definitely indeed can carry that kind of lineage was kind of very inspiring. Researching one of my first solo performance pieces was called Tears of Moons. And I performed it as part of the solo emerging artist celebration at the Guthrie. And during that play, I kind of researched Homer and how in the Greek tradition, Homer would carry a three-stringed instrument. And same with griots. Griots would carry choras and sing poetry and play their instrument. So I kind of took that kind of archetype of the traveling poet and put it with the griot. So that was kind of my first intro into that kind of artistic arena of solo performance.
So with the solo performing, do you find that easier or harder, or is it just a completely different like animal altogether than when you're like, say, if you're trying to write for like obviously like a full cast versus like something that you're going to just have to carry all yourself?
Hmm. It is both. It is both easier and harder. Like when you're in a cast with multiple people, it's not always on you, and you don't have to deal with marketing, ticket sales, set design, all these other things. You can just act. Um, then again, when you're just acting, there's so many different folks in the room, and that can be difficult to deal with, juggling so many things. So solo performance kind of is easier in that regard, where the show doesn't happen unless you do it. So you're kind of on your own time, but you're juggling so many other things. But it's easier kind of because you can control the room. The next line doesn't happen unless you say it. So you can kind of really control the current in the room, which is a cool feeling.
Yeah.
So how?
No,
Oh,
go ahead, please.
I was going to say, it's a because I feel like I've done both too, and it's as you said, like when you're in a cast, it can be freeing because you don't have all this extra stuff to do, but also you can feel extremely micromanaged in a way that can be really disheartening at times. Like, oh, you're going to walk to this part of the stage now, you're going to turn, you're going to say this line, you're going to say it like this. And it's sort of disempowering. Um, but then there's the pressure, like, oh, I'm empowered now because I'm doing all this myself. But then there's that pressure. How do you motivate yourself to put yourself out there in that place where it's
Hmm.
all on you?
Yeah. I think the motivation comes from the idea that I'm actually trying to solve a problem. Like, there's, in my early 20s, there was a lot of trauma happening. And I wrote about it because I'm actually trying to be like, process, like, why did it happen? And ask questions so it doesn't happen again. Because, yeah, it was just like a hurricane. Um, So that's kind of my fuel, to actually like pose questions that can hopefully change society. I think that's what makes theater different than like reading a novel or a poem, is that it's communal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'm actually trying to change the people in my circle. Um, yeah, my motivation comes from like a unrepresented um, community that is still reckoning with um, trauma.
Do you find that like doing these things or addressing these issues through drama, through plays, monologues and that such, that get sometimes will get the point across better? Because I guess there's that communal empathetic thing that happens when you watch an actor perform versus just coming at somebody straight, say, hey, I want to talk about this issue and such. Because then, people, anytime like any social issues, political, all that stuff, like there's people kind of sometimes if you come at them, even if you're being polite, it's just that they get people get their walls up. But I feel like there's that thing when theater or movie, it's like either theater or movies, that's something that like the walls come down a little bit, and maybe does that allow you to kind of just reach in there and maybe get to like a few more people that you wouldn't have gotten to otherwise?
For sure, totally. I think that's the great gift of like theater in particular, that it's like a metaphorical space. Like that's the sleight of hand trick. It's like you can fool them by just putting it in a metaphor. I'm not actually talking about, da 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 da. It's people project their own meaning onto like a story. Um, yeah, which kind of I think helps it go down easier than like a political speech or a lecture. Um, that's, if you tell them a story, then it's kind of a magical way to kind of get the point across because they're kind of disarmed.
Yeah, it's why Shakespeare said, "Oh, this is about Verona, not about England."
Exactly. Exactly.
We're not like this here.
Yeah.
Um, so I know that you've done a lot of work in setting up the Ife project, and you've gotten grants and things like that. A lot of the people we have on the show, part of the thing is not only creating opportunities for oneself, but then by extension, often that means they're creating opportunities for other people. So I would love to hear more about that project and how it came about and what you're trying to do with that.
For sure. So the Ife Lab is a 12-week fellowship highlighting 3 Black solo performers in the Twin Cities, and we combine film and live performance kind of thematically in an Afrofuturistic space. Um, the etymology of the word Ife comes from the Yoruba tribe, and it means home expansion. So I was curious to commission these 3 Black solo performers to create 2 pieces, one which we'll film and one which they'll perform live at the showcase. And then we'll interweave them into like this multimedia, multidisciplinary theatrical event. Um, and I chose Ife specifically because I'm a transracial adoptee. And home for me has always been like this mythical space. And I'm always curious about myths, like, the griot or Homer. So I thought, what do other folks think about home? What's home to them? And what people came out with, we commissioned myself, a poet named Ishe Brentley, and a dancer from Chicago named Asha Rowland. And people really tapped into some vulnerable topics and some ancestral topics. And I discovered like home is a really complicated place for people. It's never like a simple story. And it was just beautiful to see these solo performers express themselves and have their families come and see them. So that was kind of the gist of it. But the history of it, it's been like 13 years in the making. And I've gotten so many no's over those 13 years. Like literally, I thought I was crazy because it's like rejection letter after rejection letter. But for some reason, this past year, we got the funding to do it. But yeah, it was like literally 13 years of like no's. But
So
I realized, yeah.
was it that same drive you were talking about, the idea of solving a problem? Was it that same desire that kept you going for 13 years and kept you trying for it?
Yeah, it was. And it's like sometimes you just don't know the vocabulary. Like you just don't know what words to use on a grant application.
Mm.
And you just need someone to literally. One of the first ones I got, a lady from the Minnesota State Arts Board took the time to print out my application, literally write on it, email it back to me and say, you shouldn't use this word, use this word, change this. And learning the vocabulary is just, the idea was the same. It's just like the word choice was like the thing.
That's really interesting because that to me just means that there's this artificial barrier for many people who don't know the right language.
Yeah.
Right?
That's literally it. Yeah.
There's always this element of like playing the game, though, isn't it? No matter what type of, whether it's art, music, theater, film, it seems like there's always that. It's almost like that knowledge that they don't tell you, that you just got to find just the right person who's going to like, pull that curtain back and say, hey, no, do it like this. If you just change that wording, or if you just pitch it this way, that's going to get you in there. And sometimes like that, like, I mean, is that one of the things when you're doing this project, you're like trying to impart that kind of stuff onto these other artists? Because it feels like there's always that thing. It's like until you really learn whatever game you're playing, like that is such a huge obstacle to so many people, no matter what they're doing.
Yeah, that is so true. It's like the game is different uh, due to different organizations. Like if you're applying for a grant to the Minnesota State Arts Board, that's different than MRAC, which is different than the McKnight, which is different than the Jerome Foundation. And the vernacular you use is specific to those different folks, which is tricky. So yeah, I try to kind of pass on that if folks want to get funding, which they do, you should like do the basic steps, like read the grant application. I mean, the grant form that you're applying for, because they'll tell you what words they are using. Um, and that's kind of like the 101, but that's so tricky because it's different. Um, and yeah, it's just different at each org, you know.
So, what would you say to younger folks who are at the beginning of that 13-year process
Mhm.
about about going out there and trying to get grant funding for their project, whatever it might be?
I would say you're not crazy. Your idea is correct. You totally, it's golden. It's already done. The thing is, you need to learn the structure. Um, Read grant applications that have been accepted, which is what I did, and just learn how to what structure to use. But yeah, you're not crazy. Your passion is exactly right. You're not wrong. Just read the grant forms, and don't give up. You know, uh, it's a long haul. It's a very long haul.
Have
But
you noticed a difference in the way people kind of look at you or address you since you've started this thing? Because it's one thing to be that artist, just kind of just doing your own thing, but then when you get to that place where you're actually starting to make it happen for other people, usually like we've talked to many people on this podcast about, when you kind of make that transition to being like a facilitator for others, that it does that even like not just change the way other people see you, but does it change the way you see yourself?
that's a good question. I think people, I've kind of taken the turn into teaching sometimes, and people look at you like you have the answer or something, but it's like I really, I try to stay in a state of I honestly don't know. Like theater at its best is guesswork. It's all a guess. Even if you put on a classic, Macbeth, there's no guarantee of anything. You know, and I think to be like childlike and to always stay in a state of not knowing is the best thing you could do. Because if you move with certainty, um, it's like kind of just vain and boring. But if you're childlike in that space, then it's exciting. So I try to not know as much as possible. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I'm curious, so kind of in the same vein, along your way, besides your high school teacher you mentioned, Crystal Spring, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I say remember because it's a unique name. Um, besides your teacher, have you had any other mentors that have really helped you along the way and helped you find your place?
Oh yeah, that's the biggest thing. Um, I taught in a prison in Stillwater. I taught solo performance in a prison there, and there was this inmate who was there for a long time, and he told me, I just never had any mentors. That was just the only thing. And so, yeah, I've had great mentors, directors like Mary McClelland, James Williams, Jan Mandel. These folks just took the time to like listen to like this like youthful chaotic energy, and just took. I mean, the first grant I ever saw, didn't even apply for, was the 612 micro grant through Pillsbury House Theater, and James Williams just introduced me to the grant officer there. So that was right out of high school. So yeah, mentors are everything.
And how did you find your mentors? Like, was it happenstance? Did you go looking for them? I'm just asking for the people out there who are still like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm curious, how you came about yours.
High school, and just seeing what's in your community, because Pillsbury House Theater is right on Chicago Avenue, and it's been there for um, a long time, but there's still people who don't even know it exists and don't even know like the resources they provide. Same with Penumbra Theater. We were just in a meeting the other day. I work for Penumbra, and we were just in a meeting the other day and talking about how Penumbra's been around since 1976, and people still don't know down the block that it exists. There's some folks in the community who don't know anything about this theater thing. So I think just if folks are like curious about what's in their community, you can usually find someone who has done it before you that could lend some knowledge.
Thank you.
You mentioned earlier about the whole social justice thing, and like this last few years, it feels like especially there's just there's been like a lot, especially like in Minnesota, when like that when it seems like just everything popped off up there. And we even had another guest who was up in Minnesota. Like these guys like going and like checking the street behind me to make sure people aren't like stockpiling bricks that they can throw at somebody. Like talk about. Has that? I'm just assuming that has to have some kind of effect on your work if you're right there in the thick of it, or like even anywhere close to it. Especially if your mind's kind of already kind of pointed in that direction.
Yeah, specifically for George Floyd. Yeah, I was like there. I went to that store all the time. Like I saw the store owner lock the door. Yeah, that was an insane time. And it had a profound effect. I think there's this like dilemma though, because after George Floyd happened, literally all the Black folks in the theater community got like, they were just handing out performance opportunities. Like these organizations came to us and was like, you need to share your story, and what is this about? Which is great in one hand, but also like after the fact, it was just like, okay, back to regular programming. I think there's this kind of it had a profound effect simply because we all got like commissioned to write our point of view, and that work was needed and necessary. And we can also be of artistic use when we're not being hunted down. So there's that dichotomy that's kind of a tug of war with a lot of Black theater folks in Minneapolis and St. Paul.
Can you say more about that?
Yeah, it's literally like it's the same with like Juneteenth or like Black History Month. People reaching out only when it's trendy, and I think the Black folks here, deserve sustainability, and our artwork can be more than just what a political lens can offer. We should be commissioned year round and not just when it's at our detriment.
Yeah, like don't just come at me when like something terrible happens. I'm still, it's like I'm still around all the other times.
Yeah, yeah, we still can write about other things. you know.
Yeah, we had a guy on the show not too long ago, Kevin Saunders, who talked about that, how, he's a film actor and does a lot of film stuff, and his thing was trying to be three-dimensional and not wanting to just, he's, a certain type, and he didn't want to be just like, oh, that's all I can do. He didn't want to be the best bud or the sidekick or whatever. And so, yeah, I hear what you're saying, like, not just when it's trendy, not just when it's trending, and not just about that, right? Like, you are a
Yeah,
whole person.
Well, there's
that's
also been
exactly.
like so much of the discussion about like diversity, but someone pointed out, I was talking, I actually did a podcast before. We were talking to Sagith Verghese. If you ever watched Kim's Convenience, he played Mr.
Mm-hmm.
Mehta,
Mm-hmm.
like
Oh,
a
cool, cool.
Yep.
Indian Canadian actor.
Hmm.
But he was talking about, said the idea of like Hollywood is gravitating it towards now, but it doesn't always feel genuine. It feels more like a business decision. A lot of times, it's just like let's who can we put in here that's going to get this demographic to come into the theaters. So like, how do you navigate that? Because I'm sure on one hand you want to work, so you want to take advantage, but at the same time, he's like, if they're only going to be like, okay, we'll get you in here for now, and then just okay, now we've checked off the box, and okay, go back to wherever you came from. Like, how do you navigate that?
Yeah, navigating typecasting
Mm-hmm.
and people's narratives being put on you. Um, I think one of the ways to navigate it is just the fact that no one can tell your story better than you can. Like, you are an expert in your own experience. So trust that. And if you don't see yourself, write yourself, because that will be the narrative folks, need. Um, yeah, and it's been tricky because you don't ever want to be a puppet for folks. Um, so I think I would just say, navigating it is just trust your instincts, and if something doesn't feel whole, then um, have the wherewithal to just, um, not taking the offer, Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's hard for people sometimes because people want to just, every actor says, I just want to make a living doing this. And so that becomes their only criteria. And so other things go by the wayside then, right? Like
Mhm.
integrity,
Yeah.
personal fulfillment, lots of other stuff. So that's why I admire folks like you and other people we have on the podcast who are just like, I'm going to create my own thing. It's going to be totally my own thing, and find a way to make that work and to put it out there and to share it with people.
Eh,
Um,
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it's not, sometimes it's clear, like, this clearly isn't a three-dimensional character, but sometimes it's not. Like, I just a few months ago was going to audition for a play written by Black playwrights. And in that play, it was set in the antebellum South, and it had Black characters using blackface, and it was going to be produced at a major theater company here. And I had to sit with myself and was like, where's the line? This is like a gray area. Um, yeah, so it is very complicated. It's like, where do you see three dimensionality and then something like blackface? You know what I mean?
mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, it's also been like addressed in well, the most recent, you had American Fiction getting nominated for Best Picture, and which addresses a lot of this stuff. It's just like telling your own story, and like the idea of what point do you sell your own thing and kind of package it in such a way that it's palatable to the people who may not get it, who want it, but they only want like a particular version of it.
Hmm.
Yeah, I don't know if either one of you seen the movie, but
We're planning to watch it this weekend. I haven't seen it yet.
oh, it's great. And apparently, like what was crazy about it is that the book was written at least like 10 years ago,
Mm.
and it's still. I mean, you would, and if you didn't know, you would swear it was written like yesterday. Like it's no less relevant now than it was when it was written. because I guess like that the discussion is carried on. And then I'm also thinking about you mentioned the thing with blackface. I'm thinking about the movie Bamboozled that Spike Lee did back
Yeah.
in the day, and that one is
Yeah.
that because it definitely like it dives into that to that point. Like I think like society, we keep thinking we're at that place where we've pushed a lot of this stuff behind us, and then there's that one every once in a while something happens and you realize like nope, we're not quite there yet, because you hit just the right nerve. Like you watch that movie again, it's something like you could, if it was made today, it would hit just as hard. And then that movie's, God, I can't remember when it came. It's probably like in the early 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it's the guy, about the idea about the guy that tries to, this TV writer who's trying to get himself fired. So he writes this show, basically like a modern day minstrel show, and there's some just brutal stuff in there. But it's like he thinks by writing this horrible thing that like they're going to just reject it, and instead it becomes embraced and just gets like wildly popular, and to the point where it just it's heavy stuff. But again, it's something like it feels like you could still make that movie today and it hit every bit as hard as it did back when it was made.
For sure. Yeah. Still haven't seen Bamboozled, but I've heard so much about it. And yeah, that's like such a tricky thing. It's like satire can be so useful. And what is the line? Like what is the line between perpetuating stereotypes and using them to, you know, ask tough questions? Yeah.
Well, it's tough when everything we're experiencing, so many of the things we're experiencing, like you see the news articles and you're like, that looks like it's satire, but it's not. Like some of the extremes that we've been through in the past few years and the ridiculousness of what's happening, that, and we're coming up on all this AI stuff too, that's going to make it even harder to tell like what's real, what's not, and where we stand with everything. So it's yeah. No.
Yeah, that's true. I think we're living in this era of like discussing what is real and what that word even means, and what is like completely fiction and made up. That's that is really a kind of societal dilemma, I think. I recently saw a YouTube clip that my brother sent me about something happening. I'm really not too big into politics, but there was something. Someone insulted another congresswoman or House of
Yep.
Representatives.
Oh, we know.
Yeah, that he sent me that clip, and I was like, "Is this actually happening?"
It sounds like something that would like pop off on like The Onion or something, and then you realize like,
exactly.
no, wait, that she actually said that.
I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not going to claim her, but yeah.
No,
But
she is not in our district.
she's from Georgia.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That the congresswoman in question who got the clap back, she's actually from up northwest Georgia. So
gotcha.
That's and sadly, there's probably more. I mean, obviously she got elected, so lots of people had to vote for her. So yeah, that contingent is definitely here, and again, I think it leads to like just like we live in these kind of like hyper politicized times where I'm sure you have to deal with it too, because nowadays like it feels like we've gotten to this place in this country where it feels like suddenly every like issue feels like a rock that somebody wants to die on.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I think the polarization of everything is like creeping out. It almost seems like we live in like two different worlds. Like I don't know anyone in my circle who would condone that clip of what happened, but there's people out there apparently who believe that kind of thing could be said. Yeah, it's a polarizing time for sure.
But to go back to what we were talking about before, just the idea that, I read some book that was talking about how when people are in proximity, we actually do like physiologically sync up, like our breathing syncs and our heartbeats sync, like, and this happens because we kind of have a little like miniature, I want to say force
Like you
field,
can
but that's
literally
not the
get
right
on
word.
someone's wavelength.
Magnetic field. Like we all are, energetic beings in some way. And so like we can sync up. And I've felt that as a performer with fellow performers before, where you're so in sync. And especially when you do the exercises beforehand, before the show, where you're just like, we are now one body and I'm performing together, right? Like,
Yeah.
you've been there, devised theater, man. But like those things where you are so in sync, or just audiences or things, and to feel everyone breathing or stopping breathing together during a moment in a show, that you don't get that when you are over electronics, when you are not able to see people, when you are, like those scientists who did this study about giving people electric zaps. It's like, it's easy to dehumanize someone when you are not, or to treat them in a very dehumanized way when you are not in proximity to
Mm,
them, when you can't see them, when you can't hear them, when you can't see that their wince when you say something awful. You know what I mean?
mm.
Um,
Yeah,
so I think, to go back to what you said before, like theater is a place where that, real connection can happen differently, because when we're watching film, even, it's one way,
mm,
right?
for sure. Yeah. Yeah. That, yeah, I'm like, when I watch live theater in the theater, I'm still amazed that people know when to laugh. Like, how is it that we laugh at the same time? Like, what, how does like a room full of strangers, when something is said, laugh and then stop at the same time? It's quite a strange phenomenon. Or like people, know when to be silent, or you can feel a room lean in. I think there's that kind of, as you said, kinetic kind of human, empathetic kind of communal response that we all engage in.
Well, going back to, and this is a total, like growing up, I never went to church. My family, my mom, my dad were not religious people. Their parents were. But like, you go to church, you're quiet. You are, except when they tell you to speak, you're quiet. So, growing up, when you go to the theater, you're taught to be quiet. And I remember the first time I went to Penumbra, and it was a totally different experience.
Yeah.
And there was a guy, I can't remember what play it was. It might have been an August Wilson one. It was a long time ago. But some guy was cheating on someone, and someone all of a sudden yells out at the stage. And then like you hear people gasping, and I was like, this is so different. And I love like that people feel, just like, I got shushed one time at the Guthrie for laughing at something. Like a fellow
Wow.
audience member shushed me for laughing. And I'm like, this is a place where we are in communion with this thing that's happening in front of us. And as long as the reaction is still in communion with that, and we're not doing our own thing and distracting from it, which is different. There are those people who are having side conversations or on their phone or whatever. As long as it's an honest reaction to what's happening, I'm like, I love that.
Hmm.
And it was, yeah. But it's just a cultural difference. Like churches down here, if you go to a Black Baptist church down here.
Oh, I've been to a revival where it was like a
Yeah.
mixed crowd, and yeah, that's definitely. But I feel like there's like protocol always, wherever, depending on where you are, always, because it's in that thing where you're like, okay, it's okay to like, you get like the whole call and response thing go, or he says something in the audience, like, okay, that's your cue, the audience, to say something back, whether it's amen or whatever, like just whatever the protocol is. So I've been to that, and when you experience that, you say there's like this weird, cool, unspoken thing, because it happens in sometimes in the theater too. Like you said, like you sound like people just kind of know when to laugh and when to kind of get real quiet. Like I said, when to lean in. I mean, that's really, I guess, it I wish there's times like I really wish more people got into the theater, because I feel like it's something like in movie theaters, because I feel like most people feel like it's too much, like, because now we've gotten so used to watching movies at home that I had an old teacher in college who said that like the VHS machine was like the worst thing to ever happen to the movie going experience, because people got used to being at home where they could just do whatever they want. And more you go into theaters now and you see people. I've literally been in movies where people sit on their phones for the entire movie, or you know, you have someone like carrying on a friggin' conversation like 3 chairs down. And but I feel like I don't think I've ever been to a play where somebody, because it feels like, you know, when you're there and the performers are right there in front of you, that disrespect is going to come at a bigger cost.
Mm-hmm.
Have you kind of noticed stuff like that when you've been performing?
Oh yeah, for sure. Like during the Ife Lab, you know, we're not like, you know, a big production or anything. And I was sitting on the side and watching Ishe perform her solo performance piece, and there was this college student who was just on her phone, like just scrolling, and it was just like showing her friend and stuff, and like the rage within me that I felt. But yeah, no, I've known some performers who, you know, just like would, you know, stare at them until they stopped, you know. Because I think, yeah, we just get so used to people kind of performing in front of us, and there's, you know, a screen. But that, I think the gift of live theater is like you're in the room with these people, like, you know. Yeah, so I totally get that. It's like people have the audacity to, or maybe the addiction to screens, that they can't kind of separate from it.
I think one of the most intense things I saw is I went the time I visited New Orleans. I went to Preservation Jazz Hall. If you've never been, even if you're not like a big jazz fan, you need to go just to experience that, because it's like this really small. It looks like just a really old room, and then you've got these guys, a lot of them older people who've been playing forever, and the leader of the band is the drummer, who's the guy's the best drummer I've ever seen in person. And they have a very, very strict rule about cell phones. And he warned everybody, he says, hey, if we see a cell phone, we will stop. So they start playing. You get about 5-10 minutes in the show. And sure enough, somebody let it fly, and he shut it down. Like literally the band just stopped completely. And he said, this is your warning. If I see another phone come out, everybody's going to pack up their instruments and we're going to bounce, and you're not going to get your money back. And sure enough, that like people behaved after that, but I mean, like, that's how serious they were about it.
Gotcha. Yeah, it is that, you know, it is, I get that, you know, performing is already terrifying and your mind's going a mile a minute. And when you're in the zone and to hear like a ding, it's kind of like worse. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, or to think like, you know, you think about just being recorded by people too, and you're not asking for that, you know, and you're not expecting it, can kind of take you out of it too, because it can be such an intimate thing sometimes, you know. And I'm not even talking about like nudity on stage, which is also another thing, but like, you know, it's just a very intimate experience at times when you are being very vulnerable on the stage, and to feel sort of disrespected, or either by indifference through people just staring at their phone, or disrespected by, oh, I'm going to share this, and, you know, not, you know, that stuff, that's really rough.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the thing. It's like some of the circumstances that you have to embody as an actor is like kind of the most vulnerable thing. And you want people to just be, you know, focused, because the play can tell the difference between a room full of focused people and people who are just like dazed, you know.
Sunday matinee.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah.
We went to church, we had lunch, and now we're falling asleep in your show. Yep.
Yep. And then the performance is like pulling teeth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we've come up on the hour, which went fast. It was really nice chatting with you about all this.
You
So,
too.
um, for any of our guests, or not guests, I always want to say guests, for any of our audience who want to find you, where can they find you online?
I'm on Instagram and Facebook at Antonio Duke. I have a website, www.antonioduke.com. Yeah, come check out the work.
And do you have any performances coming up they could check out? If it's this is probably going to come out in like a month or a month and a half, so
Got you. I will have one. Since this is going to come out in a month, I could say this. I recently got a McKnight Fellowship through the Playwright Center to travel to Chicago and Mississippi and write a new solo show that's probably going to go up in March. So I don't know if folks are around in March, but
awesome.
come check it out at the Playwright Center.
Congrats. That's fabulous.
Nice. Well, thanks for coming out, man.
Thanks for having me.
That will be all for this episode. To keep up with the show, follow us on social media at Scratch Claw Push. If social media isn't your thing, you can contact us at scratchclawpush@gmail.com. To learn more about the show, visit scratchclawpush.com. This podcast has been a Carcutta Media production. This recording, or any portion thereof, may not be reproduced or used in any manner whatsoever without the express written permission of the publisher, except for the use of brief quotations in a review. Copyright 2024 by Carcutta Media, LLC, all rights reserved.